Other news story of the day is Prime Minister Stephen Harper's surprise capitulation on that massive budget bill. It was presented as a take-it-or-leave-it package yesterday, but today the government agreed to kick the pension plan off the omnibus. The changes were passed by all-party agreement this morning. All right, let's bring in our MPs. We have the trio of MPs here to discuss this unexpected development and other issues too. Chris Alexander is the Parliamentary Secretary for the Defence. He's in Toronto. Massimo Passetti is a Liberal MP. He joins me from Montreal. And here in the studio, NDP House Leader Nathan Cullen. All right, I want to go to you first, Chris Alexander. Your boss seemed to think this wasn't going to happen yesterday. Now it happened. What made him change his mind?
Well, listen, we will do anything that we can to ensure that the low tax plan for jobs and growth that we put forward in our budget back on March the 29th moves forward. And today we had the opportunity for the first time in many months to move forward on an important aspect of that. We made a commitment to Canadians to keep taxes low and to balance the budget. One of the things we committed to do was to reform the MP pension plan by making sure that we as MPs paid our fair share and brought that contribution up to 50%. Which is a best practice for sustainable pensions in the private sector and the public sector in Canada. So that was in the budget implementation bill. The opposition agreed to expedite the passage of that portion of the bill. In doing so, they've agreed to keep the rest of the bill together. But we're glad that that has happened because it means a savings for taxpayers. It means a much fairer system that is defensible over the long term, and it means a sustainable pension system because some of these provisions are also going to be applied to the public sector of Canada over time.
All right, I want to get to you, Massimo, and it was your leader's initiative that said let's separate this from the main omnibus bill. Were you surprised that the Prime Minister went along with it?
Well, it's a great suggestion, so I'm not surprised.
Of course it is.
But I'm surprised that the Prime Minister actually said yes and he's okay with it. But I mean, let's face it, it's something that we've been asking for a long while. I don't know why it has to come to this. I mean, I think everybody agreed that the pensions had to be looked at. But I mean, again, we didn't solve anything because it was the Prime Minister that decided what to do with the pensions. We said we would be willing to go even a little bit further, but we would have liked to have had a proper committee study the whole issue and maybe even have an independent committee look at it. We haven't solved anything. It's just another issue that we can now, get away from this big omnibus bill and just concentrate on some other issues that are in that huge document of theirs.
Okay. Well, Nathan Cullen, you were involved in negotiations on this. What happened to change? I mean, there was some finagling that went on this morning.
Yeah.
What was the story behind the scenes?
There's a few stages to this. The first was the proposal that came from the Liberals. I think they either by accident or by choice made a mistake and included all pensions, public pensions. We're talking RCMP and everyone who works for the federal government in this package to then sweep it through with no debate. And that's too much because that's a $2.5 billion question. We're not talking about pensions for just politicians at this point. We're talking about 450,000 Canadians.
That was a typo, they said, right?
They said, well, that's a bad typo, Don. You don't want to get these typos wrong because you end up agreeing with a bunch of things that you might not want. So we went back to the government and said, well, let's portion this out. Let's just take the MP and senators' pension out. We can fast track it before a question period, which we were able to do, get the thing done, and prove, actually, two things. One is that Parliament, in fact, can work from time to time, which is nice, because that's an objective of ours. Secondly, that the declarations that this bill was perfect, incarnate, and couldn't be touched, couldn't be divided, must be left as it is not in fact the case, that you can divide some things out. And so the next stage is, well, all those things about navigable waters and environmental protection, those have nothing to do with the budget. Why don't we take those pieces out so that Canadians can understand what it is and start to actually manifest the words the Prime Minister used to believe about the need to have MPs voting on things they understand.
I think you might be dreaming a little bit, Nathan Cullen.
I love to hope.
Chris Alexander, as you suggested, the rest of the bill goes through as a package. Will you entertain any more reasonable suggestions from the opposition parties, if they're reasonable?
Well, listen, Don, as you know,
I gotta hear
from
this one.
years and indeed decades past, it is standard procedure to have two budget implementation acts. This bill reflects all of the proposals for jobs and growth, for strengthening communities and families, for clean energy, for accountability to taxpayers, for reforming the tax system, which is a continuous process in this country, that we promised way back on March the 29th.
But Chris,
we have agreed all along to keep this together, as it has always been according to our parliamentary traditions. The opposition has shown today that they are capable of understanding even complex provisions of the bill virtually overnight and moving forward
Chris,
with
that's
that.
not nice.
We'd like to see more of that.
Don't be mean.
He had to take a shot.
He had to take a shot. You know, you try to work with these guys, and they still take a shot with one hand.
Massimo, I want to go to you on this.
Nathan, it's a real contrast with the filibusters last time, which didn't get us very far.
Massimo, I want to go to you on this.
Well,
Jim Flaherty was on the show
done
yesterday, Massimo, and he said to me, he said, there's nothing in this bill that you can't tie back to something that was introduced in the spring budget. Nothing. And I'm curious, is he telling the truth, or do you think there's an exaggeration at play here?
Well, no, because the way that the government's been wording it is if they include just one word in the budget, which is also a 250, 300-page document, they can all of a sudden amend legislation that hasn't been touched for 100 years, like they did in the spring regarding the Fisheries and Oceans Act. So just Mr. Alexander makes no sense. I mean, it's a bill regarding the budget. Meanwhile, they have no accountability on the environment. If they're so gun-ho that there's nothing wrong with this piece of legislation, let's break it up. Let's give it to the committees that are responsible and have the knowledge to analyze this piece of legislation. We can do it quicker, much more efficient, and we can actually have the expertise involved if there is any amendments. I mean, none of these amendments are going to cost anything, and they're just going to give Canadians a better piece of legislation, like we did with the MPs.
Here's the thing: the government has to somehow convince people, and they were trying this out today. You saw John Baird, Flaherty yesterday saying, "Oh, the thing on navigable waters, which is going to take out protection for hundreds of Canadian rivers and waterways. Oh, that was in the budget. It's on page 282." And you pull it up, and it's not there. And you say, "Well, what's this about?" Oh, it's just about canoes going down a river. It's not about canoes going down a river. The reason the law is in place from the beginning, which is 1880s is when it was brought in, was to make sure that there was navigable ability to go down different rivers for commercial shipping and all the rest. The point is this. The government continually says, just trust us. We mentioned it in the budget at some point, so it must be in there now, and it's all just details. And we know that's not the case. The last one, 2/3 of the budget, dealt with environmental assessments. That was their Budget Implementation Act. Had nothing to do with the original budget. It was a pipeline enabling document is what it was, saying less public scrutiny, let's just get these pipelines through, never mind the public, never mind that there's serious environmental consequences to getting these things wrong.
Last 10 seconds to you, Chris Alexander.
Don, it's just not correct to say, as Nathan has just done, that there was no discussion of these important reforms to environmental protection, strengthening of environmental protection in the budget. There is a responsible resource development component to that budget.
Chris,
if Nathan has read it, which is absolutely central to our jobs and growth agenda for this country.
Okay.
And we want to be able to deliver.
This is a long 10 seconds.
This is a very long 10
seconds.
We want to be able to deliver assessments in a single process for a single project in a scheduled timeline.
You're finished, Chris Alexander. Thanks very much for your input, all of you. Massimo, Chris Alexander,
like
Nathan
Joe
Cullen.
Biden.
Thanks.
We appreciate you taking the time. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good weekend.
Those guys are hard to shut up once they get going, but they're fun. Okay, let's go.